si è voltato improvvisamente alla gente che era lì e ha detto: la gente che cosa dice che io sia? Chi dice che io sia? E voi chi dite che io sia? E allora si è voltato improvvisamente alla gente che era lì e ha detto: la gente che cosa dice che io sia? Chi dice che io sia? E voi chi dite che io sia? E allora si è voltato improvvisamente alla gente che era lì e ha detto: la gente che cosa dice che io sia? Chi dice che io sia? E voi chi dite che io sia? E allora si è voltato improvvisamente alla gente che era lì e ha detto: la gente che cosa dice che io sia? Chi dice che io sia? E voi chi dite che io sia? E allora si è voltato improvvisamente alla gente che era lì e ha detto: la gente che cosa dice che io sia? Chi dice che io sia? E voi chi dite che io sia? E allora si è voltato improvvisamente alla gente che era lì e ha detto: la gente che cosa dice che io sia? Chi dice che io sia? E voi chi dite che io sia? E allora si è voltato improvvisamente alla gente che era lì e ha detto: la gente che cosa dice che io sia? Chi dice che io sia? E voi chi dite che io sia? E allora si è voltato improvvisamente alla gente che era lì e ha detto: la gente che cosa dice che io sia? Chi dice che io sia? E voi chi dite che io sia?
Civiltà dell'amore, fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
Buonasera a tutti. Buonasera a tutti, benvenuti.
Hello everybody, welcome to this meeting about the true secret of evolution from competition to collaboration. Today we're going to talk about the interesting theme of evolution and the evolution of life on Earth through history. And starting from some scientific evidence and data, we're going to discover that life on Earth hasn't happened only through a fight for survival, but also through a collaboration and reciprocal collaboration of construction with the environment. So this throws over a bunch of prejudices that still our textbooks still contain. The ideas we're going to present today are included in the book, The True Secret of Evolution, From Conflict to Collaboration, in Cantagalli. Two of our guests have taken part in this book, Carlo Bellieni and Lourdes Velazquez, who we'll meet in a second. Even a non-scientific public knows things like the giraffe's neck that gets taller to reach food from up in the trees, and from generation to generation, the neck gets longer. And we all know who is Charles Darwin, who after Lamarck brought us the evolution of species and the idea of natural selection. So the survival of the fittest, the struggle to survive, and random mutations that allow some to survive at to the harm of others. So the bases of traditional evolution need to consider the principle of collaboration, which is a great novelty in the scientific field in biology, and epigenetics, which we'll be told what that is. And these show how DNA of a species manages to adapt itself to its environment and to live with different species without harming them, but welcoming them and proliferating together. So let's thank our guests who, so they'll talk about overcoming a bit of social Darwinism and the impact on society, on human, in a philosophical and social sense. So and in the actions of humankind. So more or less competition. These things have opened true debates around human rights, the dignity of the individual, and the debate about the ethical and bioethical debates. So what perspective do we want to give you today through what science has conquered? So what they'll help us today is the idea that creation that looks marveling at itself. So the marvel of that irregular movement, but nevertheless harmonious, which seeks to realize itself, which is its own evolving itself. So let's give a big welcome to our guests. Their biographies are very rich, and let's summarize a bit. So I present to you Professor Carlo Bellieni, Professor of Pediatrics in the University of Siena, member of the Bioethics Commission in Tuscany, a bioethicist. As one of the first 20 researchers in the world in studying of pain in the classification 2022, and the userexpertscape.com. Pier Francesco Ferrari is a neuroscientist and dietologist. He's teacher in Parma University and director of the Marc Jeannerod Institute of Cognitive Sciences in Lyon, in France, one of the most important neuroscience centers in Europe. Lourdes Velazquez, who's he'll be linked to us, we'll see her on the video, from Mexico. She's a philosopher and bioethicist, specializing in pre-Hispanic cultures, teacher of philosophy and bioethics. He is in the Panamerican University of Mexico and president of the Bioethics and Ethics Commission in the International Federation of the Society of Philosophy. And so Letizia Bardazzi, philosopher. So Evandro Agazzi, a philosopher and logician, is also linked there. He's presided a number of philosophical associations. And so it's a great applause. Let's give a great applause to our prestigious guests. Welcome all, and thank you. Take it easy. starting with Professor Bellieni, who will project us some images, some pictures, so we can better follow his presentation. So let's ask him to show to us, to describe what are the novelties in the scientific field and this front in biology and epigenetics that bring the evidence of this collaboration, of this solidarity in nature. Thank you, Professor. Over to you. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all for this invitation. I want to put up the first slide, if we can, please. Somebody can help me if we don't see it. Sorry, back one. Okay. So let's take a journey. We'll try and take a simple journey together within something that seems complicated, and maybe some of us might skip over this because we've all grown up with a bunch of mantras. So mantras are we've grown up with phrases, notions that we take for granted. But if somebody was to say this isn't true, first, before reflecting on them and saying that it could possibly be not true or true, we stop our mouths instead. So it's afraid of novelties. So the mantra that I'm referring to is the mantra not really Darwinian, because we're indebted to Darwin, Darwin the scientist, Darwin the explorer, Darwin the genius, who opened for us a bunch of amazing doors to things that we're seeing today and going to discuss. But the mantra that we're talking about is that of which still gets taught in schools and still in newspapers and so on, that evolution of life, that nobody denies. It seems that it's the most beautiful thing in the world, that is relegated to two simple phenomena, that is the struggle and chance, randomness. So these things are in there, certainly, of course, yeah. Who can ignore the struggles, and the conflict, and who can ignore chance, randomness in life? But what the scientific research today tells us is that this is not everything. It's not everything. To understand these steps, let's throw a first light on what I want to say. Normally, we say that we're talking about evolution, of changes of nature, of changes of species, according to random phenomena, and not following phenomena that are linked to and phenomena linked to competition. Today, science tells us that, yeah, this is true, but as well as competition, there's also a great deal of collaboration. The first light to throw on this is this: the collaboration that there is within the same genome. A genome is a difficult word. It means the DNA. Maybe that's a term that we're more familiar with. And so they say that the genome changes by chance. Instead, it's not always these changes, natural changes aren't always due to a random change in the genome. Many changes in nature come from, think about this, for the fact that some bits of genome, bits of DNA, little bits enter into a cell, from one cell into another. So viruses do this. Plasmids do this. Indeed, some bacteria, we discovered a while ago, that some bacteria, past their capacity of being resistant to antibiotics, they transmit it, this little bit of DNA that makes them able to survive antibiotics, they pass it to other bacteria that are there next to them. So it's not a form of solidarity. It's not that. There's no idea that bacteria show solidarity, but it's a collaboration. And we start to see that in nature there is collaboration. And so another great form of collaboration is we ourselves. Inside of all of our cells, and I'll show you something that might perplex some of us, but inside our cells there are bacteria. These bacteria, from the beginning of history of man and of life, they've entered into our cells, and they've taken life, and they've taken possession of these cells, and now we live through these X bacteria. They're no longer bacteria, that are called mitochondria. You've probably heard of these. And these mitochondria carry bits of DNA, and so it's another form of collaboration, a bacterium that brought its DNA information into the cell, not because the cell is changed, but simply because the DNA entered with the bacterium. So another effort, let's try, a step further on. A second reflector, because we've seen that this collaboration goes in one way, DNA that enters into another cell. Okay. Now there's another form of collaboration, an interesting one. This collaboration is in two ways. When two living beings, two individuals, survive, one not at the cost of the others, but one to the advantage of the other. One, and in fact, one can't live without the other. So let's look at this flower. It's an enormous flower. It's called Nepenthes. It's a carnivorous plant. This thing devours insects. They slip inside its walls, which is slippery. They find some acid and they die in there. But this plant has had a mutation because it kills all the insects apart from one, a particular ant, the worker ant. So the worker ant lives inside there. It lives well because it eats the leftovers of that these Nepenthes have. So and they help the Nepenthes to not to die by eating up those leftovers. But and think we all know the clownfish, like Nemo. So Nemo, the clownfish, lives inside the anemone. The anemone is that plant that we see around the fish. It's a plant it's stinging. It hurts. It burns. It causes burns. On all fishes apart from the clownfish, which helps the anemone to clean itself from its impurities. So the clownfish helps the anemone, and the anemone, through its mutation, helps the clownfish. But if you look at the right, you see another picture, the image of the crocodile. And what's that crocodile got in its mouth? A little bird, the pivial bird, the plover. And this is another double mutation. And so double mutations can't, they bump against the idea of randomness, because, again, taking the example of the clownfish, could it be that it remains immune to the stinging of the anemone, but that wouldn't do any good, wouldn't be any useful. But it's useful that the anemone gets helped by the clownfish, so that there be some two mutations that happen contemporaneously. And so this really busts up the idea of chance, but not that of plasticity, which is another biological idea, the idea that mutations, the changes in nature, and then we'll see this a bit better, because they help each other. If there's a change a little bit that helps the organism, it helps that change to emerge in the other species. So the plover, that bird inside the mouth of the crocodile, he escapes from all the other predators apart from the crocodile, because he knows the croc won't eat him. Why won't the crocodile eat him? Because the plover goes to clean up the teeth of the crocodile from the different substances that would damage it, that would damage this teeth. So here too, the plover had a mutation that makes it insensitive to fear of crocodiles, and crocodiles had a mutation that makes them a friend of the plover. But this happens also in something even perhaps a bit more simpler, but even in our own organism, there are parts and things that alone would be useless. Think about snake teeth. The snake's teeth, which wouldn't be of any good if they didn't have any poison behind them. So it would bite, and the bite wouldn't do anything. But it needs the poison. And what would the use of the poison be if the snake didn't have those teeth that could puncture the prey? So two mutations that have to happen together. So not very random, and a lot of collaboration. But the most amusing thing of this is this one, the bombardier beetle. The bombardier beetle is a marvelous example that for defending itself against enemies, what does it do? It shoots out of its apparatus, its rear, little balls, incandescent balls, at a velocity and a very high temperature. And to do this, it needs to have two bubbles of gas inside itself. And how did these two bubbles of gas evolve? One without the other wouldn't be any use. So if you think of random mutations, we think about that maybe inside the hydrogen peroxide might have formed. And what would you do with hydrogen peroxide? Nothing, if you don't have the other gas. And so with the other gas, what would be any point without the first one? So a collaboration, even there, within the one organism. But we start to see these things, and we start to understand that for 30 years by now, we've been talking, it's being taught in all the schools, in all the universities, a new bit of biology, which is the epigenetics. Which is a word I don't ask you to remember, but I want you to recall the concept, to remember the concept, that the environment influences on DNA. 20 years ago, there was a dogma. And scientists speak of dogma, this was not good. There was this dogma, which is called the central dogma of biology. It said that DNA influences the environment, but the environment doesn't influence the DNA. But this is not true. Now we know that the environment influences DNA, not provoking mutations, but influencing by provoking or silencing or the activation of certain genes. And so they produce some proteins that then produce some substances which help the organism. So we know that smog, oxygen, light, the caresses of the mother, these activate genes, or they silence them according to what they're good for. So these mutations that we've talked about till now have their basis, and their basis is the interaction with the environment, which is a great revolution, because the environment collaborates with the cell, and every cell can collaborate with the one next to it because it's next to it and sends its signals. But so, how should we teach evolution today? So maybe starting by thanking Darwin, but in the second place, I'd give a couple of messages. First message is that of negative thanks. Negative thanks, which is this. We, in our images, in our pictures of evolution, we often find this setup here. The ape that becomes a different sort of ape that then becomes a man. The first bit doesn't matter in the sense that a small ape becomes a big ape, becomes a man, fine, whatever. Yeah, no. I think we're also right to lower our head and not feel as important as we claim we are. But the last one is the one that I've shown through here. There's tons of them. The last picture on the right, the last figure on the right, man, the human being. But what is this human being? It's got 4 characteristics, the human being, that you found in these images. 4 characteristics. 1 is a male, is white, an adult, and healthy. So on the fact that it's male and white, okay, I'll let that pass because that would be a very long discourse. about wokeness, feminism, etc., which I think is fair enough, but that's so obvious that we'll just pass over that. So what is less obvious is that the male be healthy. You never see one on a wheelchair there. We say, thank you, no, because today we've got the Paralympics, which are fantastic, but get ignored. But you never see a child at the end of this ladder. The child is the perfect human being, like an adult is a perfect human, and like an old person is a perfect human being. Why do you need to think that the perfect human being, that these scales, make us think that there's a subliminal thinking here that the white, healthy adult male is the perfect human. It's not like that. First thing. Second thing. So let's change these. The second thing. How do we teach? I'd like to finish in my field, that of pediatrics. In pediatrics, we see two things that are amazing. When the mum determines the evolution of the child, the caresses of the mum, or their cuddles, or on the other side, unfortunately, the violence from the parents changes the development of the genes of the children. It alters the development of the genes of the child. So caresses in a positive way, obviously. They make it more able to handle stress when it's an adult, or to develop its brain. Caresses from the mum, think about this. And second thing, how the mum determines the evolution. It's determined by the evolution. The evolution determines the mother. What does that mean? Evolution affects the mother. So this is amazingly that the only time in all the history of biology where an extraneous being enters into another one and doesn't get destroyed. And this extraneous thing is the embryo. The embryo enters the mother of the mum. It's an extraneous, it's a stranger's. It has a DNA which isn't that of the mother. It's not the mother. And the mother doesn't destroy it for a bunch of exchanges of hormones and stuff that it will pass over. Mum doesn't destroy it. And this is thanks to the merit of evolution. But evolution also has this thing, that the embryo, the fetus, sends into the mother some of its own cells, and these enter the mother's blood, and they don't get destroyed, but they get into certain organs of the mum, so including the brain, the amygdala, make it more resistant, make it stronger, make the mother stronger, more able to deal with all the stresses, to handle all the stresses and pains of pregnancy and of childbirth. And so I'll finish, if you let me quote myself, but simply because this final phrase that I want to read out to you, that's the last phrase of an article I wrote back in La Repubblica, which says, all of this opens up to a fascinating world, and it's the evidence that life on Earth wasn't developed only through the fight's struggle to survive, but also through reciprocal collaboration. And the story of collaboration of viruses with cells, with bacteria with other bacteria, with weaker species with those stronger, and vice versa. The narration of evolution must be reviewed, revisited, at least in part, and certainly in how we teach it in schools. Also because the idea of supremacy of the most adapted has arrived to give the idea of superior people, of master race or whatever, who would be those most adapted, the survival of the fittest, and that gives us that terrible idea of social Darwinism that Darwin wouldn't have recognized. Epigenetics and all of biology show instead a different journey, a different path. This is like the way that different species can live together without hurting each other, and so actually proliferating together. And when we think of that in life, something might be rubbish, might be useless, like the people that we talked about before, like the DNA that we speak about before, maybe It means we haven't studied it properly. Thank you.
Grazie, grazie.
Thank you, Professor. This immersion into the marvels and even the surprises of nature. Let's go on to Professor Ferrari, who I'd ask to give based on his field of research, that of codifying emotions through its neurons and other emotions. I'd like to ask him what advantages are born from this type of collaboration that we're talking about now, based on the learning of human behaviors and the growth of individuals. Thank you, Professor. So thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Carlo, for organizing this conference. So my reflections, starting straight from your question, I'll take a kind of wider approach here. So to start my presentation, I'd start with a question. Quite a strong question. That's what's the true nature of man? We ask ourselves, and it's a debate that's been going on for centuries. The idea, it's been at the center of the debates of many philosophers and biologists in the 1900s, and there's been a great back and forth. There's been Hobbesian visions about the noble savage, about the instinctively evil nature of man, but saved by civilization. On the other hand, we have different currents that have an exactly different view. That is, that there's a primitive nature that's intrinsically noble and yet savage, that is ultimately good, but was then corrupted by civilization and transformed. It's interesting because this is an oscillation, a difference. It's a discussion that's ongoing in the field, both in biology and philosophy. It's often called the peace-violence paradox. It's a paradox we're talking about of our nature. If we look at the last 100 years, the last century, but even recent history, it shows us that we definitely have a tendency towards violence, to be totally detached from the feelings of others. We have a tendency to wage war. And despite the fact that we're all against war, we also have this nature. We're incapable of helping others, even those we don't know. We have a capacity for empathy that's particularly important. And this strikes us because we shouldn't deny our biology. The studies of the last 50 years, and perhaps even more, that about genetics and neuroscience, show us that there are genes that define aggression. There are certain neurotransmitters that are well defined. We see them in all animals. We see them in humans. We know it's real that there are genes that define this, but the fact there are genes that control it doesn't mean we can't escape it. We are not just our own genes. We spoke about the effect of our environment, and we know that there's an influence of the environment on the development of our socialization. So we need to better understand this aspect. We need to look at our roots. And if we look at our roots, I'd like to make a kind of evolutionary journey along with you. We'll do about 5 million years from when we evolved from the line that now led to chimpanzees and other chimps, other apes. So on the left, There's a bonobo male and female that they basically chimpanzees. For those of you who aren't expert with primates, and on the right there are actual chimpanzees, ones you usually see in nature documentaries, and they live in different areas of Africa, and yet they're different species. So if we go and look at their socialization, these two creatures, the ones that are closest to us from an evolutionary standpoint, we see that chimpanzees, for example, live in big communities, communities that collaborate, they're very social. They've demonstrated that they have culture, that they use tools, that studies done in laboratories, cognitive studies, that we've seen they have the great cognitive skills. They're very high. They're not too different from us under certain circumstances, and they also have empathy. And this aspect of their emotions is very interesting for our species. Moreover, studies in the last 20 years have shown that they're very cooperative. For example, when they hunt in groups, and they have far more success. So the cooperation has developed slowly over the course of our evolution with many different functions, so we can access and manage our resources better. Cooperation reinforces social bonds and rends communities more cohesive. The individual is less strong if he acts on his own. And these studies have demonstrated this for us. There's an aspect that's there's a dark side to their nature that Jane Goodall, the biologist who studied you see on all the National Geographic documentaries on Tanzania in the 60s and 70s. She was troubled by a discovery which had an incredible echo even to today and is still studied and is still questioned. That is tribal wars between different competing tribes of chimpanzees. They don't only compete, these tribes, they fight, they kill, and they cannibalize their enemies. It's the birth of a war, and this was the great debate that led us to this. So on one hand, we have a cooperative but quite violent society. If we look at a much more tolerant society like bonobos, we see that there isn't this level of violence. Rather, their conflicts, they resolve them in a very simple way, with sex. And they're far more tolerant between them. The females are dominant. Let's not get into any complicated discussions here, but they always get asked about these things, particularly by feminists. But in this case, it's a part of our evolution. It's not only the other. This is an example of cooperation. This was taken from an archive. So do you mind if I stand up? I'm used to standing up. But this is taken from the Amory University Archive, which is a great primate study center in Atlanta. And in the 30s, the first studies of cognition were undergone, and we see these two young chimpanzees that need to pull something to get food together. If you can see, first they start, look at how they start synchronizing with each other. Look at how carefully they look at each other. They wait, and then they pull together. Now, this wasn't taught to them with any reinforcement. It was natural. They learnt it by themselves straight away. Not only then, when you'll see hopefully now when one of them gets distracted towards the end of this video. These are two chimpanzees. They're about 4 or 5 years old. They're very, very young. So they learn this immediately. It's not written in their DNA. It's learned. And so when one is reluctant, it loses interest, then the other chimpanzee encourages him. This idea, in reality, was picked up by primate scientists. And you can see they distract each other, and so the other chimpanzee, even if he's not hungry, he collaborates all the same. Food isn't the motivation. It's not food they're after. It's something more social. So these modern primate scientists, they compared bonobos and chimpanzees, and bonobos eat more and they're more cooperative. They have greater success. So that means that tolerance promotes social behavior and it's easier. So being part of society implies the concept of interdependence. And to have some stable relationships, strong relationships, like we have in our human societies and in chimpanzee societies and of other primates, it implies some needs and some rules, and they all know the rules. Even if they don't have a verbal communication like us, they still know the rules. And new models of evolution of societies show us that natural selection could have favored these types of behaviors, even when there are costs imposed on because of helping others. It's not just reproduction that's important here, that's the prime mover of evolution. This is to show you how rules apply to everyone. If we see how if the other receives unequal treatment compared to ours, the animal it gets sad, it gets offended. We'll replay the video, the clip here. In the clip I'm about to show you, you can see on the left a capuchin monkey who's given a small token. He has to give the token back to the scientist, and he's given a cucumber, which isn't the greatest reward. Whereas on the right, his fellow monkey is given a raisin, which is much nicer. So at the beginning, you'll see. So you see, it gives back the token, he gets his cucumber and he eats it, there's no problem. But then the other one, for the same work, he's given a raisin. So now, once again, here, we've done the same task, I'll give you a cucumber. It doesn't work like that. I want what he's got. That's unfair. So you can see that there's an understanding as far as a treatment and rules. So to conclude this first part, in primates, including humans, the most tolerant societies are capable of greater empathy. So what do we mean by empathy? There's a difference between what was coined in the 1900s, feeling into, to feel yourself inside something, the capacity to understand and share emotions of another individual. In general, strangely on this fact, the scientists agree. They all agree. They say there's something in your body, a channel that when I imitate someone else, that when I'm affected by the expression, by the emotions of someone else, this is a form of empathy. Then there's a more cognitive aspect. I don't necessarily feel what you feel, but I can understand it. And we study it from a cerebral point of view on some mechanisms in which perceptions of emotions of the others activate within us the same reaction, the same motor reaction to when I would perceive the same response, same emotion. So we see this with how contagious laughing can be. Here's a video that was taken years ago during a conference between Helsinki and Bill Clinton, in which Bill Clinton begins laughing. And we'll see if this starts. Sorry, excuse the delays. In this moment, Yeltsin accuses the press. This should have been a failure. In reality, Yeltsin says, "You guys are a failure." Bill Clinton doesn't stop. this reaction that you have is an empathetic reaction. That you feel exactly, and that what they're feeling, you activate the same component, the same expressive and motor neuron response. Let's see if I can go forwards a bit. It's what in English is called "you like me." And so we're the same with regards to a condition, being human, and not only that, but being, even if we're different species, we can recognize each other. We can see something similar. So the empathetic brain, these responses have been studied and been discovered. It was purely Italians by a laboratory in Parma under the direction of Giacomo Nizzolati. They were studied first in monkeys and then in humans, and they studied these neurons, and it was discovered that there are some neurons that activate when we observe a behavior, an emotion in others, and the same neurons fire when we ourselves feel that emotion, that same emotion. So it's an action, reaction, and perception kind of reaction. So this hypothesis, it's not just a hypothesis, it's a theoretical model that's been widely demonstrated among many species. So it seems like a universal mechanism. It's called the shared brain network hypothesis. So the brain and its network, and the shared network of brains between us and the others. So these are areas of the brain which you see in different experiments using MRI, which are activated both when we experience an emotion, but also when we see the emotion, and that same emotion in the face of another. So we reflect other emotions in our own brain through this mechanism. Not only that, but we can also modulate it. The experience modulates it. There's a whole biology behind this on how these networks are created. That there isn't a gene. There isn't a gene for these reflective neurons, but we know that this mechanism can be modulated. If we play with a player, if I play cards with Carlo and I realize that you're cheating me, then I go to an MRI machine and I look at your emotions. My emotions lowers in your regards. I'm no longer so empathetic. I no longer feel your pain as well. Vice versa. If you behave yourself well with me, then my level of empathy increases, and you can see that. The fair player and unfair player. Unfair means if they've been dishonest, they've cheated. So you can see their cerebral response of the observer has lowered. Finally, the final 5 minutes on the development of the environment. The environment is important. We've spoken about the first relationships. This is a central theme in all development in our evolutionary history. Why? Because there exists a very sensitive period during our development. If something happens in the first years of our life, from an environmental point of view, of a parental care, our brain is more sensitive in this moment of development, more than in the later stage. And any adversities that are suffered in this phase of development in the first years of life can have some effects on development and on our social skills later on in life. Some studies show us that this happens through a remodulation within the brain of expressions of genes which, when they lack sufficient care, can lead to a modified neuroarchitecture in the brain with some risks of psychopathology during their adolescence that can last throughout your entire life. I'll finish by giving you an example in Nature. This is a recent study. We're talking about, it came out very recently, last year, and it has caused great debate. That is, it was a study on macaques that live on the island of Santiago in Puerto Rico, a island in the Caribbean. They feed them, they live well, they form their own communities. There's only them on the island and the researchers who study them. So what happened? So in 2017, a hurricane hit the island and it devastated it, and all the vegetation was destroyed. The macaques are not known for being particularly friendly. It's a society that they form very intolerant groups with strong coalitions within them, strong bonds, and they're very despotic in their hierarchies. What happened after this hurricane was that their behavior, their social dynamics changed completely. This species on this island became far more tolerant. They were lacking resources, not food sources, but what increased, you can see it here, on the left, there's two groups. And on this diagram, you can see the connections between various members of the community on the left before, and on the right after the hurricane. As you can see, the natural contacts, the social contacts between all these individuals, something changed. We're studying it, but what happened? How did it happen? What are the mechanisms? Because surely nature and their environment affect society. There isn't a society among macaques that's evil, or of evil humans and of good humans. Our environment interacts with society, and this is the message that I wanted to end with, and I'll end with this message. There's three brief points I'd like to leave you to think about. The first is that our evolution shows that there are diverse motivations in our nature that push us to be egotistical and selfish or cooperative. There isn't per se a good nature or evil nature within humans. Empathy is an intrinsic component that's very powerful, and it's natural in human beings. However, we have the ability to suppress this cognitively. This is an experience we've had. Finally, your environment can influence the emergence of a society that's more tolerant and cooperative. And this is very important. And with this, I'll conclude, and I thank you all.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having brought us in this adventure that is the evolution of sociality. We could really listen to this for hours, so thank you so much. And now it's the time to pass over to our guests in Mexico. Thank you for linking to us. We're sorry to not have you here with us. So I see Professor Agazzi, and I still don't see Professor Velazquez, unfortunately. Good evening, Professor. Do you hear us? So first, I'll let you speak first. Can you hear us properly? So what I would like to ask you is to speak to us about the history of evolution, to give us some hints about Lamarck, Darwin, the modern evolutionism and creationism, the intelligent design theory. What changes in vision are brought by all of this theme of collaboration and cooperation and solidarity? What novelty do these things bring? And does this scientific evidence that the professors have just shown us and described for us, what do these bring, this idea of the exchange between the environment and changing? What do over to you, Professor. So there are many things that have been hinted at in your question that I can't respond to them all in a few words, but really, that about the one evolution is an important position, is that it has been It was produced in a recent epoch because, why? Because it's always been there in people. And I think there was a history as long as the Earth. So some consequences come out from this immediately. So if the Earth has changed, necessarily this implies that there was a change in the conditions, the environmental conditions of who lived on the Earth. And so if there's all a connection here that requests the presence of factual analysis and also a reconceptualization. So if there's no, so the concept of evolution, we can say like this, that the evolution or this productive position, according to which the species become, they descend by generation, from earlier species that were less numerous and less complex. This is a simple definition that there's opened lots of debates, and these are debates of centuries old, because in this way of thinking, above all of the Egyptians, those that had the conviction of a logical order. This is very important. Because why? Because it's at the base of not less than the classification, the classification of the which, if this is a scheme that's absolutely rigorous, it started from the conviction that, perhaps religious, that the world was created by God, which is a being that's very, very intelligent, and that had huge intelligence. And so to say that's naturally ordered, and so if it's logically ordered, we can reconstruct this order. And reconstruct this order means taking in hand the data and seeking to fit them together in a way that you get a coherent scheme in which, here's the point, that there are some empty spaces. And why are they empty? Because, for the moment empty, because for the moment we haven't managed to find the thing to go in that space, because they should be there. And this is a principle that's governed science for a long time. But think about the periodic table of the elements. Before the periodic table of Mendeleev's periodic table came out, there were some holes, so to say, and then they seemed just temporary. So, and then different aspects came and that managed to fill those holes. So, therefore, the great discovery, to say, of Linnaeus was that he started to construct what we called the systema naturae, the system of nature. So the classification is very important. Why? Because thanks to the classification, we could introduce a logical order, and not a pile of different facts. But let's just think about something like this. Lamarck, right from 1810, in his philosophique logique, he picked up a few fundamental things about evolution right back then. Why? Because he was at the same time, he was a diligent researcher to ordering things, but all of everything got grouped into a class that had insects and words and vertebrates, and everything was grouped into this thing. And it was clear that for a researcher like him, this required something in constructing through years and years of research, and a description of all these things. So the effort to pull all these things together was incredible. Sorry, we're losing the audio. So the natural history of animals is like this. Can we hand over to Professor Velazquez after you finished? We're a bit behind the schedule, I'm afraid. We don't have much time. Okay, shall we go to the presentation of the book? You can still finish the thought that you had, if you like. So that a collaboration between a science of ordering and the conceptual and research that patiently gathering all the data and systematizing them, and this brings us somewhere. So that's what I wanted to point out in a few words. The great effort that Marc put in. So thanks. So shall we present the books? Yes, thank you, Professor. Thank you so much. The question that we had, that we wanted to turn to Professor Velazquez, is that tell us the philosophical implications of what you have just, of what you just said, for this collaborative principle that nature shows to us in this new researches, above all on the front of overcoming social Darwinism. What are the impacts on ethical and human rights, and more generally on the dignity of the individual? Can if Professor Velazquez isn't there, you can. Professor Velazquez isn't linked up yet.
Allora risponda lei.
So I'll let you answer. Let's see in a moment. So my contribution here, and I'd like to thank you all for inviting me. I think that I'd like to contribute as a philosopher, but particularly to talk about what you spoke about human rights, about the social question about women. So this is something I've tried to do in my talk. That is to say how I thought about it as a woman, because remember, Darwin had certain prejudices that were very strong, which maybe it was just the sign of the times, but all of his followers, let's say, they kept up with these prejudices. So the position of women with respect to it today, there's a tendency to dilute it in such a way as a product of cultural evolution, when in reality it's written in natural evolution, the difference between the two sexes. And that's something that you can't get rid of, but it's also not a justification. But the fact that, despite the fact we can try to eliminate it, there's a strong question of social justice here, and we shouldn't turn it into a negative discrimination, like, for example, happens with a uterus for hire policies. And we need to take into consideration that Darwin thought that women should be mothers and should just cook and clean, but no, even when he was asked directly in the same year that he died, Carolina Buscanar was asked, and she was a Boston entrepreneur, she was asked to explain the sexist theories well. He replied, let's say, practically exactly like this. Well, let's say contextually, if women are generally superior to men on moral questions, then they're inferior with regards to intellect, and that's hard to make laws of inheritance so that they can equal men's intellect. The only experience for men is when they're treated. The only place they're treated with inferiority is with work. But this has a lot to do with our happiness and our lives at home. So for Darwin, women were the cornerstone of society, provided they stay at home to look after their children. I obviously I don't think this is right by any sense, and because of that I want to underline this, because we think that things cannot stay. We can't keep going on with that mentality, even if we say even the idea is developed rather recently, because there are a few people who opposed him, who raised their voices against this. So if we want to talk about human rights, I think that the true problem is rather that of including the ideas of the difference between men and women in a far more general discussion of protection and defense of human rights, which allow humans to live within their own humanity, not if they're men or women, but simply by the virtue of their own belonging to the human species. Even if we need to give a total parity of dignity with all members of our species. I don't know if I was able to answer your question. Yes, thank you. I'd like to thank you, Professor. We've already spoken about the book, and I invite our listeners to get a copy of it, where you truly get to the bottom of these concepts you've been presenting to us now. I'd like to thank both of you, and I hope we can have you at the meeting in person next year. Thank you for despite all the tech problems, and have a nice day. So to conclude, I'd like to say that we've learned a lot today, that we've got a lot of things to think about, particularly the discovery of the non-causality of evolution. It's random evolution, and that there's a certain order to things. So we've been getting to the root of it, as Professor Ferrari showed us. So there's a kind of order, I'd say, that has harmony, as Joseph Ratzinger called it. There's a cooperation and a solidarity, as Professor Bellieni explained to us. So I'd like to thank our guests for these thoughts on evolution, related to what Pope Benedict XVI, in his message to the participants of the Pontifical Academy 2008, said. Evolving means literally rolling out. Literally means rolling out parchment. The image of nature as a book is like a book in the history, the writing, and the meaning. And today we'd say that the evolution of which we can read according to the different approaches of the sciences, discovering throughout time the fundamental presence of an author that wanted to reveal itself. This image helps us to understand that the world, far from being born out of chaos, is similar to an orderly book. There's a mathematics in progress. I'd like to thank our guests for being here, and for all the information they've given us and what they've invited us to look at through nature, for the intelligence with which they've proposed some very interesting topics to us. We thank them all with an applause. We invite you all to help support the meeting. We invite you all to help support it for its own future, for the next few years. And a new important notice is that in this particular historic moment where there are ever more unknowns that ask us, how is it possible to construct a dialogue and construct peace? We couldn't not feel provoked and enlightened by what Cardinal Piazzaballa at the inaugural conference told us. For this reason, the meeting will donate part of the donations received over the course of this week and donate it to emergencies in the Holy Land. Thank you, everyone, and good evening.
La civiltà dell'amore, fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
E allora si è voltato improvvisamente alla gente che era lì e ha detto: la gente che cosa dice che io sia? Chi dice che io sia? E voi chi dite che io sia? E allora si è voltato improvvisamente alla gente che era lì e ha detto: la gente che cosa dice che io sia? Chi dice che io sia? E voi chi dite che io sia? E allora si è voltato improvvisamente alla gente che era lì e ha detto: la gente che cosa dice che io sia? Chi dice che io sia? E voi chi dite che io sia?